On the frozen edge of Anchorage, where the wind howls like a wounded animal, an auction hammer falls against the metal door of a forgotten storage unit. Emily Carter, 8 months pregnant and clinging to hope, as thin as the winter air, stands beside her only companion ranger, a German shepherd who refuses to leave her side. The crowd scoffs when she raises her paddle. $20 for a pile of junk no one wanted. They mock her desperation. But Ranger doesn't bark. He stares at the unit's door with an intensity that makes Emily's heart race. He senses something, something alive in memory. When the rusted padlock clicks open, a blast of stale, icy air escapes as if the past itself exhales. Inside lies a maze of forgotten furniture, waterlogged boxes, and relics long abandoned. Emily begins to dig through the wreckage of other people's lives, her numb hands brushing against a quilt-wrapped wooden box hidden in the shadows. As Ranger whines softly, Emily lifts the lid. Inside are faded photographs, military insignias, and handwritten letters, all addressed to a name she has never spoken aloud yet, one she has carried in her heartbeat her entire life. What if this storage unit wasn't a random purchase? What if she was always meant to find it? Snow moves like sifted flour over Anchorage's empty lots, a white hush that swallows engines' voices and second thoughts. The storm leans in from the bay, frosting windshields and stinging cheeks, but Sarah Matthews drives anyway. 8 months pregnant, she braces against the steering wheel of a rusted Ford Explorer whose heater coughs more than it warms. 29 tall, long-limbed, beneath the swell of a late pregnancy, she wears a faded navy coat that has lost its shine and a knit hat tugged low over dark brown hair. Her pale skin is chapped along the cheekbones. Her hazel eyes carry but a sleepless shimmer, the look of someone counting bovos in weeks at the same time. She tells herself that if she reaches the storage auction before the worst of the squall, maybe the last $20 in her pocket will become a door out of this winter. Max rides in the back, steady as a constant. A 4-year-old German shepherd with a thick sable coat, he is broad-shouldered, clean-lined, and alert, ears pricked as if the horizon were speaking in a language only dogs remember. Sarah found him 3 winters ago behind a gas station dumpster, thin, shivering his paws raw. Since then, Max has become more than a rescue. He is guardrail and compass, loyal in a way humans sometimes promise and rarely deliver. The baby turns under Sarah's ribs when she says his name, as if recognizing the second heartbeat that guards them both. She rubs her belly through the coat, whispering, "We're okay," and tries to believe it. Mark's last text, "I'm not ready for," this still finds its way between her thoughts, like a draft through a badly sealed window. The layoff found her next, then the notices on the door. What remains is motion in a classified ad public storage auction. No minimum bid. The Anchorage storage facility is a rectangle of corrugated metal and drifting snow. People huddle near the roll-up doors, the regulars, men with oiled dark beards and cracked knuckles, women in quilted parkas with clipboards and narrowed eyes. The auctioneer, Frank Dalton, is barrel-chested, late 60s, with a steel-gray beard and the steady baritone of a man who once commanded crews on fishing boats. Frank's cheeks are ruddy, his eyes practical and kind. In quick, guarded flashes, he's seen too many bad bets to judge them out loud. A short, round woman in a purple parka eyes Sarah's belly. "First-timer," she says, voice bright with cold and condescension. Sarah nods and swallows the heat climbing her throat. Max stands at heel-tail level, posture polite, but ready. Near the chain-link fence, an old man watches from the lee of a wind-battered truck. Elias Ward, thin as a mast, late 70s. Sharp nose, clean-shaven eyes, the pale blue of thawed ice. His coat is military green, mended at the elbows. A knit cap hides silver stubble. He doesn't bid, doesn't chatter. He simply watches her as if taking attendance in a class where fate is late, but expected. "Gather up," Frank calls. "Unit 14B, the padlock is the color of old pennies." When the door yanks upward, the storage breathes out a stale, cold sigh. Shapes appear, a broken dresser draped with a dusty sheet, a lamp crushed at the neck boxes, softened by old water and the weight of years. The regulars glance, catalog, step back. "Worthless," someone mutters, bored as weather. Max doesn't bark, he listens. Then from somewhere deep in his chest, a low hum, a question more than a warning. He leans forward, nostrils quivering, and Sarah feels a small foot slide along the inside of her belly, a curious press, as if the baby has turned to look too. The sensation startles her, sweet and sharp. She steadies a hand on the doorframe and studies the mess. What she sees isn't value so much as possibility, the thin margin that separates done for from maybe. The crowd begins to drift toward the next door, already bored with 14B. Do I hear 50, Frank says. Silence. 30 boots scuff. Snow hisses. 20. A man in a trapper hat shakes his head. The purple parka woman smirks. Sarah breathes through the ache at the base of her spine. $20 is fuel and milk and 2 days of quiet notices. $20 is also a hinge. The baby shifts again, a tiny insistence from inside, and Max flicks his eyes to her waiting. Sarah raises the laminated paddle with a glove that trembles less than she expects. Laughter feathers through the cold. Dumpster unit, a grizzled reseller, says to no one in particular, and someone else answers, she'll learn. Frank doesn't smile or wince. 20 to bidder 12, he says, voice even. Going once, Sarah's breath fogs the air. She swallows the metallic taste of fear. Going twice. Max steps closer to the threshold, head tilted, as if listening through the junk to a frequency only he remembers. Sold. The hammer pops against his palm. The sound skips across the lot like a small, hard truth. Frank presses the cold key into her gloved hand. Clear it in 72 hours, he says, professional and brisk, then softer and aside, meant for dignity, not pity. Storms rolling in fast. Take it slow. The purple parka woman tosses a look over her shoulder, an amused benediction for lost causes. The grizzled man mutters something about rookies and dump fees. Sarah tucks the key into her pocket, breathes through the flutter in her chest, and steps forward. The unit smells like damp paper motor oil and the faint sweetness of old cedar. Max moves with her, 2 paces ahead, then back, as if he were tethered to her pulse. He lowers his head and noses along the concrete, then stops at the edge of a toppled bookcase. The fur along his shoulders lifts. He gives a single bark, sharp and precise. The baby kicks hard in response, a drumbeat against her palm. Hey, she whispers, half to Max, half to the child. I feel it too. From the fence line, Elias Ward's voice cuts the wind low and reedy. Dogs remember what people try to forget. Sarah turns. Up close, Elias looks wind-carved and unblinking, a man hammered by winters and something harder. A thin white scar runs from his left temple to the ridge of his jaw. It gives his face the air of a map with one important road erased. You bidding, Sarah asks, startled by her own boldness. Not today, he says, just watching which way the snow falls. His gaze rests on Max. Good dog, old blood, knows the difference between junk and a story. Before she can answer, he tips 2 fingers to the brim of his cap and steps back into the weather, the storm swallowing him like a rumor. Sarah kneels slowly, careful of the pull in her lower back, and lifts the broken bookcase enough for Max to wedge his muzzle underneath. His teeth delicately catch the corner of a moth-eaten quilt. Together they slide it free, revealing a small wooden box the color of dark honey, its edges worn smooth by hands that loved it. The lid is scratched, the brass latch tarnished, but the box feels stubbornly whole, like a sentence that refuses to end wrong. Sarah's throat tightens. She doesn't open it, not yet. She looks past it into the depth of the unit, at decades of someone's unkept promises. For a moment, rage flares a quick, bitter spark at Mark, at the company, at a world that lets a woman count coins for diapers. But the spark cools into resolve. Max leans his shoulder against her knee. The baby settles. Snow ticks on the metal door like a distant clock. All right, Sarah says to both of them, to all 3 of them really, 1 box at a time. And in the quiet center of the storm, it feels less like a gamble and more like a door finally swinging inward. The air inside the storage unit felt different the moment Sarah stepped past the threshold. The cold from outside was sharp and honest, but the cold here was old, unmoving, like time itself had stopped breathing. Dust motes swirled in faint beams of light that slipped between boxes and broken furniture. Sarah steadied herself with one hand against a warped table leg while the other instinctively shielded her belly. The baby moved gently, a slow turning motion beneath her skin, as though reacting not to sound but to presence. Behind her, Max's claws clicked against the concrete floor, his ears pivoting with silent purpose. Something in this space had already called to him. Max did not hesitate. The German shepherd's thick coat rippled as he lowered his head, moving briskly past the debris, as though navigating a familiar map. He passed the toppled bookcase and stopped at a cedar chest wedged beneath a moth-eaten quilt. His tail went still. His eyes locked on the chest with an unwavering intensity, and then he began to paw at it once, twice, each motion precise and urgent. Sarah's heart began to hammer in her chest, not with fear, but with a strange rising certainty she could not name. She knelt slowly, her breath catching, as Max whined a deep, emotional sound she had rarely heard from him. It wasn't a warning. It was a calling. With fingers that trembled only slightly, Sarah lifted the lid. The hinges creaked softly, the sound swallowed by the dense stillness of the unit. Inside, wrapped in yellowed fabric, were bundles of letters tied with ribbon, faded to a dusty rose. Beneath them lay a stack of black and white photographs and a folded document, carefully placed as if meant to be found. Sarah reached for the top photograph. It showed a young woman standing in front of a blooming tree, her long dark hair lifted by a breeze, her face gentle but shadowed by unspoken sorrow. On the back, in looping script, was a name: Elizabeth Collins Spring, 1972. Sarah felt her pulse stutter. The name struck her mind with the shocking clarity of a church bell. Beneath the photo was a thin birth certificate, edges curled with age. The child's name had been left blank. Only two words were written beneath "baby girl." Her vision blurred. She blinked, forcing it to clear a breath, shallow and unsteady. She had seen this before long ago when she was 12. Her adoptive mother had shown her a redacted form, a document missing names but not initials. Sarah's hands tightened around the paper as the baby inside her belly moved in firm, rhythmic kicks, as if responding to the truth unfolding in her grasp. Max pressed his head against her side, then gently rested his chin across her stomach. The warmth of him steadied her and deepened the ache blooming in her chest. "Elizabeth," she whispered the word, catching on her tongue like a prayer, or a wound reopening after years of silence. Footsteps sounded softly on the concrete behind them. Sarah turned to see Frank Dalton standing at the entrance, his thick shoulders dusted with snow. His face, ruddy from the cold, was composed with a calm that came from years of witnessing moments like this. Moments when a person found more than they were ready to know. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly. His eyes drifted to the cedar chest, then to the birth certificate in her hand. His voice lowered. "That unit belonged to a woman who came here twice a year, paid in wash, never missed a due date. Name was Collins, Elizabeth, if I remember correctly." Sarah swallowed hard. The chill in the air wasn't just physical. Now it was inside her, moving through her veins like an awakening. Max shifted closer, his body shielding her, his gaze sharp and alert toward the darkness of the unit, as if expecting something or someone to step out of it. The unit seemed to hold its breath. Between the letters, the faded photographs, and the unspoken recognition in Frank's eyes, Sarah felt her life tilt, as though the ground beneath her had rearranged itself. She gently closed the lid of the chest, her fingers lingering on the worn brass latch. The baby's movements slowed, settled as though soothed by the contact. Sarah exhaled a long, steady breath. "This isn't junk," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. Max lifted his head and let out a quiet chuff, the sound resolute, affirming. Frank nodded once gravely. "No," he said, "it's a story, and I think you've just opened the first page." The morning brought no sunlight, only a pale gray sky pressed low over Anchorage, as if the clouds had grown weary of floating. Sarah sat behind the wheel of her Ford, hands firm around the steering wheel. The cedar box rested on the passenger seat, wrapped in a blanket as though it were something living. Max sat upright in the back, alert, ears high. The restless thump of her baby's kicks had eased into slow, rhythmic movements, as though the child sensed the importance of where they were going. Sarah had made her choice. She would find out who Elizabeth Collins really was and why her belongings had been waiting in that storage unit, like a message buried beneath snow and time. Anchorage City Hall stood at the end of a long stretch of icy pavement, its brick walls partially covered with frost. Inside, the warm air smelled faintly of paper and old coffee. A receptionist with silver hair and lined skin greeted Sarah with a patient, practiced smile. Her name tag read Miriam Carter. She was in her late 60s, short and slightly stooped, with small blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Miriam's voice was gentle but held the tone of someone who had seen thousands of lives pass through these halls, each one searching for something. "Researching property or family records?" she asked. Sarah hesitated only a moment before answering. "Family." Adoption, possibly. Max stood beside her tail, still eyes tracking the receptionist with calm intensity. Miriam's gaze fell to Max and her breath caught. "That dog," she whispered. Her expression softened into something like memory. "I haven't seen one like him since." She stopped herself, straightened, and motioned for Sarah to follow. They were led to an archive room lined with metal filing cabinets. The room was empty except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights. Miriam unlocked one drawer, fingers trembling slightly. Back in the 70s, a nurse named Elizabeth Collins filed several private petitions here, she said quietly. She often came with a German shepherd, looked just like yours. Sarah felt the air thicken around her. Max was a rescue, she said, voice barely audible. Miriam nodded, eyes reflecting something deeper than coincidence. Sometimes animals remember what people forget. The same words Elias had spoken echoed in her mind, and she felt the baby respond with a faint but insistent push. Sarah spent hours flipping through old adoption indexes, birth records, and handwritten notes. Max lying at her feet the whole time, his head resting between his paws, but his ears flicking at the turn of every page. Several times he stood up abruptly, moving toward a different cabin, staring intently as though urging her to follow a scent hidden within ink and time. Finally, Miriam returned with a box labeled Collins E. Confidential. She placed it gently on the table. "I shouldn't show you this without clearance," Miriam said, "but something tells me this belongs to you." Sarah's heart pounded as she lifted the lid. Inside were notarized documents, letters addressed but never mailed, and a faded photograph of Elizabeth standing outside a hospital. In her arms, she held a newborn, wrapped in a floral blanket, the same pattern Sarah remembered from childhood pictures. Written in fragile ink beneath the photo were the words, "For the day she comes back to find me." Sarah pressed a hand to her chest, breath thinning. Max approached the table and nudged the photograph with his nose, then looked up at Sarah with a steady gaze as if to say, "This is where we were meant to be." The next stop was Anchorage County Hospital Archives, now a partially closed facility used for record storage. The building was colder than City Hall, its halls echoing with distant creaks. A lone archivist, Henry Lawson, met her at the entrance. Henry was in his early 70s, tall and thin, with a narrow face, a trimmed white beard, and a voice that carried the weary patience of a man who had spent a lifetime organizing other people's forgotten histories. Yet when his eyes fell on Max, he stepped back slightly, his expression shifting from indifference to shock. "I know that look," Henry murmured. "There was a dog belonged to Nurse Collins. She said he came from a bloodline meant to guard." He looked at Sarah, then truly seeing her for the first time. "Are you her daughter?" It was the first time anyone had ever asked her that aloud. Sarah opened her mouth, but no words came, only the silent tremor of truth awakening inside her. Henry guided them to a restricted archive room. Inside, he retrieved a bound ledger from the early 1980s. "These are maternity ward logs," he explained. Sarah traced her finger down the column until she found it, Collins Elizabeth A. March 4th, 1983. Female infant. Transferred under confidentiality order. The corresponding infant ID number matched the code on her adoption file. There was no longer any doubt. The baby shifted in her womb, not restlessly, but with a deliberate rhythm, as if responding to finally being known. Max placed his head gently against Sarah's knee. She laid her hand on his fur, drawing strength from his quiet, unwavering presence. The pieces were no longer scattered fragments of strangers' belongings. They were the story of her own beginning, carefully preserved in a storage unit, waiting for her to be ready to receive it. As she left the archive, snow had begun to fall again, soft and slow, covering her footprints almost as soon as she made them. Sarah looked down at Max. "We didn't find this," she whispered. "It found us." Max gave a single nod of his head, as though agreeing with a truth older than both of them. The snow had not stopped in 2 days. Anchorage was wrapped in a silence so thick it felt sacred, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Sarah drove slowly along the remote road that curved behind the old storage facility, following not a map, but Max. The German shepherd sat alert in the back seat, his golden brown eyes fixed on the snow-draped forest ahead. He wasn't restless, he was certain. Each breath from him came slow and deliberate, as if he were remembering a path he had never walked, yet had always known. They reached a narrow trailhead where tire tracks ended abruptly beneath untouched snow. Sarah stopped the car, her breath fogging in the frigid air. The baby pressed against her ribs, a sharp movement like a warning or a push forward. Max jumped out before she even opened her door, his paws landing softly on the snow without hesitation. He didn't look back. He knew she would follow. Sarah adjusted her wool coat, pulled a scarf around her face, and stepped into the forest. Tall spruce trees loomed overhead, their branches sagging beneath the snow's weight. There was no wind, no sound, but the crunch of her boots and Max's steady movement ahead. Despite the cold, a thin line of heat traveled up Sarah's spine, a sense that something was watching, not with malice, but with expectation. Minutes stretched, and the forest grew denser. Sarah's breath quickened, not from exertion, but from an inexplicable pull in her chest. She pressed a hand to her belly. The baby responded instantly with a firm kick. Max stopped suddenly. His ears stood straight, and he released a low growl, not of aggression, but warning. He stood between Sarah and a mound of snow that sloped unnaturally, as if something large lay buried beneath. Max turned his head and met Sarah's gaze. His eyes were not those of an animal responding to instinct. They were ancient, aware, almost human in their clarity. Slowly he stepped aside and nudged the snowy mound with his nose. Sarah approached, breath trembling. Beneath the snow, her gloved hand brushed wood. Her heart pounded. This was not a fallen tree. It was a door. With effort, she cleared away the packed snow to reveal a wooden hatch reinforced with iron bands, weathered but intact. A metal handle protruded from its center, engraved with the initials so worn she could barely read them. But she didn't need to. EC, her mother's initials. The cold stung her throat as she lifted the hatch. A rush of air escaped, not the stale air of a forgotten place, but something warmer, almost comforting. Max entered first, descending the narrow steps with cautious confidence. Sarah followed, one hand tracing the stone wall for balance, the other resting on her belly. Inside the hidden chamber, the temperature rose slightly. The space was small, shaped like a half circle carved into the earth. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars of preserved berries, hand-sewn quilts, and small wooden toys. A rocking horse, hand-carved and painted with faded flowers, sat in the corner. There was a crib, her breath caught, a crib identical to the one she had always seen in a dream she thought belonged to someone else. On a small table lay a bundle of letters tied with a blue ribbon, and beneath them a sealed envelope addressed in flowing handwriting, "To my daughter, if you are here, destiny has spoken." Tears blurred her vision as she opened the envelope. "My dearest child, if your hands are the ones opening this letter, then the time has come. This place was built to be found not by strangers, but by blood. There are memories stored here that were too precious to leave in the world above. If fate has guided you to this place, it means the circle of separation is ending. It means my blood has returned to its source." Sarah pressed the letter to her chest. Max moved around her in a slow circle, never breaking eye contact with the shadows in the corners of the chamber. His fur stood on end, not in fear, but in heightened awareness. He released a quiet, steady whine, then positioned himself between Sarah and the dark passage at the back of the chamber, a passage she hadn't noticed until now. It was a small tunnel leading deeper underground. Sarah felt a pulse, then not from her own heartbeat, but from the ground, as if something beneath the earth had just awakened. She stepped back. Max bared his teeth, not in threat, but in declaration. Whatever was waiting in that darkness was no longer asleep. The candle Sarah had lit flickered against the stone walls of the underground chamber, casting trembling shadows that made the past feel alive. She stood perfectly still, one hand supporting her aching lower back, the other clutching the final letter she had taken from the hidden envelope. Max sat beside her, posture, tall ears pinned forward, eyes glimmering with a deep alertness that bordered on reverence, as though he was not merely watching for danger, but standing witness to a sacred awakening. Sarah unfolded the second page of the letter. The handwriting was delicate but strong, each stroke deliberate, as if written by someone who knew time was running out, yet needed every word to carry weight beyond death. "My daughter, if Max has found you, then the bond has already awakened. The dog with you is not coincidence. His line descends from my own companion Argo, whom I entrusted to a friend when I was forced into hiding. Our family has always shared an unusual gift, a sensitivity to the unseen paths of fate. Our dogs have guarded that gift for generations." Sarah's breath hitched as she looked down at Max. The German shepherd's fur bristled, as though he too understood every word. Beneath the letter, a faded photograph had been placed of a young Elizabeth Collins in a nurse's uniform, smiling down at a German shepherd at her side. The resemblance to Max was unmistakable, the same deep-set golden eyes, the same dark muzzle, the same marking over one brow like a crescent moon. Sarah pressed a trembling hand to her stomach. The baby kicked hard once, twice in powerful rhythmic pulses that felt like signals, not spasms. She winced but did not step back. Something was shifting inside her, a rush of heat through her veins, a knowing that was not learned but inherited. She turned the page. If you feel the stirring in your child, do not fear it. The awakening happens when blood returns to its origin. You were never abandoned. You were hidden, because your life and the life of the child you now carry holds the final key. Do not run from what is calling you. Destiny has chosen its hour. As Sarah read the final line, Max is not your pet. Max is your guardian of blood and soul. He has come to lead you home. Max raised his head and released a long, echoing howl. It was not a sound of pain. It was a sound of recognition. The chamber itself seemed to respond to air shifting, a faint tremor rolling beneath Sarah's feet. For a brief moment, she felt as if another presence stood beside her, not seen but undeniably their warm familiar. A scent of lavender and antiseptic filled the air, the scent of a nurse's hands. Elizabeth. Sarah's knees weakened. She sank to the cold stone floor, tears filling her eyes, not of sorrow, but of release. All the years of doubt, the feeling that something essential was missing, the strange dreams of places she had never been, all of it pointed to this moment. She had not found the storage unit, it had called her. The air thickened. Max stepped forward, standing in between Sarah and the tunnel leading deeper underground. His tail stiff, body ready. His eyes were fixed ahead with ancient authority. He was no longer simply a dog. He was a sentinel of blood. The baby responded again, this time with a sharp rolling push so powerful it stole Sarah's breath. She gasped, gripping her belly, not in fear, but in awe. Her child was awakening to the truth of their lineage. A pulse of warmth radiated outward, filling her limbs with strength. For the first time in months, she did not feel weak or afraid. She rose slowly to her feet. "I won't run," she whispered, voice steady with newfound resolve. Her breath formed a pale mist in the air, though the room had grown inexplicably warm. "This ends with me, or begins." Max stepped forward and pressed his head gently against her leg, a vow made in silence. Behind them, the wind outside the chamber began to wail, not with storm, but with voices long lost to time. And Sarah knew with a clarity deeper than thought that the journey was no longer about survival. It was about destiny. There are moments in life when what seems like coincidence is actually the gentle hand of God guiding us toward our true purpose. Sarah did not find that storage unit by chance, nor did Max appear in her life without meaning. Every step, every heartbeat, every tear was part of a divine design, a reminder that no matter how lost we may feel, we are never forgotten in the eyes of the one who created us. Just as Sarah discovered that her greatest pain was actually the doorway to her destiny, each of us carries hidden miracles waiting to be revealed. God often answers our prayers not with what we expect, but with what our soul truly needs. Sometimes He pulls us through storms not to break us, but to break open the truth that was buried inside us all along. Maybe you too are standing before a closed door in life right now. Maybe you are facing loneliness, financial hardship, or uncertainty about tomorrow. But let this story remind you, God's timing is perfect. His plans are greater than our fears, and His love reaches even the places we thought were forgotten. Miracles do not always come as flashes of light. Sometimes they come as a whisper, a memory, a dog's loyal gaze, or the kick of a child yet to be born, telling us it's not the end, it's the beginning. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that you are part of something bigger than your pain, then don't keep it to yourself. Please comment, Amen, or share how God has touched your life. Click like to show your support. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of faith renewal and miracles in everyday life. May God bless you, your family, and every unborn miracle waiting to enter this world. May your path be protected, your faith be renewed, and your heart be reminded you are exactly where you are meant to be. Amen.